Cultural diplomacy. Now, this seems to be a relatively light subject in comparison to the very serious and in some cases really moving topics that you've heard about earlier on. But you will see how it all ties in somehow, because what I want to share with you is a story of successes, mishaps, frustrations, utter failures, but also I think the story of how the relationship between a small country at the heart of Central Europe and a huge country like Canada can be shaped, and be shaped in a meaningful way by cultural diplomacy. Now, Austria, to many Canadians and to many people around the world, looks a bit like this. This is Hallstatt, a World Heritage Site, which draws millions of visitors every year, and whose culture goes back to the Bronze Age, very long ago. Or for others, it looks a bit like this, with vineyards as far as the eye can see, and of course the whole culture that is associated with enjoyment of life. Or for others, especially in this season now, it's historic architecture, it's Christmas markets. You can probably see it. This is the Belvedere in Vienna, and it's surrounded by Christmas decorations. So this is what you would see if you went to Vienna just right now. So it's a very conservative idea of a very beautiful country. Now, my role is to try and inspire people to look beyond the traditional and to be interested in this kind of Austria. That's the Kunsthaus in Graz, which was built in 2003 when Graz was European Capital of Culture. So the contemporary, the edgy, the surprising, sometimes also, appallingly weird, but somehow also beautifully inspiring contemporary nature. What people are longing for when they hear about Austria, the Canadians that I talk to, is these palaces, ballrooms, people waltzing. And of course, some of that we bring to Canada. This is a fantastic singer, Kimmy McLaren, who gave an operetta recital here in Ottawa about this time last year. So I'm not saying this is not important, because this is a way for Canadians to immediately connect to their idea of what Austria is, or Europe more generally. And this is a concert we had in April in Toronto. Two brilliant musicians. This gentleman, Friedrich Kleinhappel, is actually somebody who had a very tough life story, because he's extremely short. He's about this height. So his instrument is almost taller than he is. And he had to find his own style to play while reclining. And he's a fantastic virtuoso, and he really brought down the house when we had him in Toronto in April. So the other cliche that you have about Austria, Germany, Central Europe more generally is of course folklore, beer drinking, as we've heard before tonight, and the lederhosen. Of course my children have lederhosen. They don't wear them to school, but it's part of who we are and what we do. And of course it's great for tourism. I'm sure they sell a lot of those to tourists. And we also try to see brass ensembles like this one, which played in Ottawa last Sunday. This is Leonhard Leb and Trumpets of Vienna. They managed to mix these traditional styles and Christmas songs, and they write their own contemporary music. They have a lot of material that sounds weird to the uninitiated ear, and that is really fascinating. So these people are in Ottawa Saturday and Sunday, and they're now down in Ontario. Or this trio, which is peculiar in many ways. It's really a multinational exercise. The pianist is an Austrian, Mr. Zubeck. The man who plays the viola, the gamba, is a French-Canadian, and the man who's hiding behind his tuba is German. And you would expect them, of course, with this set of instruments to play something very Baroque and traditional, and not at all. It sounds like electronic music when you're listening to them. I don't have any samples, but this is quite spectacular. This was taken in Ottawa when they played here. Now, Austria is closely associated with classical music. This is the Vienna Boys Choir playing with an ensemble in an undisclosed location, but most likely in a church. You can see the organ at the back. And they've come to Canada very regularly. They're the magnificent ambassadors of European, of Austrian culture. They have a kinship with a similar choir that exists in Montreal. But on the other hand, of course, we also bring new voices. These two young ladies played here in Ottawa. They're called Juneberry. They were inspired actually by the Saskatoon berry. Can you imagine that? So they draw their inspiration from something as Canadian as the Juneberry when they play experimental jazz and cutting edge in many ways. And of course, these two young ladies are from Vienna. They did one of their first North American tours through us. This is the Ensemble Lux. You can't hear them, unfortunately. The quartet who played Monday night in Toronto and last Saturday in Montreal. And what they do would probably make most of you shiver and cringe. This is 20th century and contemporary chamber music. The sounds they can produce with their instruments are absolutely mind-boggling, and they have a very faithful following. And again, I'm sorry I don't have any samples, and they're absolutely sympathetic and friendly people. Now, one thing I can't show you, unfortunately, is the film programs we do, because we don't own the rights to the photos. So we'll briefly talk about literature, because again, this is the idea that people have of books and of intellectual life in Austria. It's a Baroque library, of which there are many. This one is in a monastery where I was as a student. Beautiful memories in the south of Austria. And of course, we try to bring this culture of books also to Canada. This is an exhibit that was at the Bronfman Library in Montreal in April, May of this year, which was extremely well received, dealing with Ingeborg Bachmann, an Austrian 20th century author who wrote mostly about war, peace, her personal experiences, her pain, the trouble she had overcoming her own family history. So this connects very strongly to some of the stories you've heard this evening here in this very place. Architecture is maybe another interesting aspect. This is what people think of when you conjure the idea of architecture in Austria. That's one of many beautiful Baroque churches. But what we want people to pay attention to is this, the Austrian Cultural Forum in New York City, 52nd Street, next to Fifth Avenue. This is where I would say the epicenter of contemporary Austrian culture in North America lies. And these people have sent us many programs, and they have been a great source of inspiration. And this is what you will see in Canada very shortly. That's an exhibit of contemporary architecture from the west of Austria, where the mountains are tall and the cows are fair, and the architecture is exceptional. This will be in Toronto and Halifax in the first half of 2017. Now, museums, fine arts. This is the Vienna Museum of Fine Arts. I just wanted to give you again this notion that this is what people come to Austria for, and there is an ambassador of this culture of fine arts here in Ottawa. And who has seen this painting before? You know what it is? It's called Hope 1 actually. It's by one of the most famous Austrian painters of the early 20th century, Gustav Klimt, and it's found at the National Gallery in Ottawa. This photo is not too great, it's my own, but gives you an idea. But of course, again, we try to be contemporary, we try to be cutting edge, and so we will sometimes step out of our comfort zones. And this is not just about fighting obesity. We will step out of our comfort zones and bring the latest and the most relevant positions of contemporary art. This is an exhibit we sponsored in Montreal, which was on from August to October of this year. And this is the Austrian artist we flew in on that occasion, and she has a position that I think many young people can relate to, this OMG. I mean, she's my age, but you could think that she might as well be a teenager, because the way she approaches life is probably something that many of you will be able to connect with, I hope. Her name is Tanya Widmann, and she created an installation specifically for this exhibit that we had in Montreal. And this man is relevant to Canada for another reason. His name is Ernst Logan. He was a scholar at Banff in Alberta, and he traveled up to Fort McMurray to go see the oil sands. And in his art, this is an exhibit where he's talking with visitors here in Canada. In his art, he's looking, whoops, sorry, I'm missing a picture there. He's talking about the impact of oil sands on livelihood, the environment, and of course, the world of fine art and concept art. So this is actually surprisingly relevant to the present day discussion here in Canada. Now, of course, you know, I told you about Vorarlberg, where the cows are fair and the life is jolly. But of course, we also bring our own cows to Canada. Yeah. So this is an exhibit we did together with the University of Saskatchewan in Saskatoon. And the lady there in the stripes is the curator of this magnificent exhibit called Peripheral Influences. And what could be more peripheral than Saskatchewan? What could be more peripheral than Vorarlberg? So much for the connection there. And now, finally, I think I want to make a fundamental point that a very prominent Canadian has made before. We Austrians would like to be known for what is between our ears rather than for what lies beneath our feet, which can be snow, skis, other gear. So I've tried very briefly, and I've probably run over my time, to show that cultural diplomacy has many facets. It is a source of a lot of elation when things work, can be a source of a lot of frustration when they don't, but it's always a source of connection between the peoples of Canada and the people of Austria. It's a source of mutual inspiration and connectedness. I mean, if there's one thing we know about cultural diplomacy, is that in the end it serves the same purpose as any other form of diplomacy, namely to foster peace, prosperity, justice, to have the peoples of, in that case, Austria and Canada, but it could be anywhere in the world, think about the bigger issues of our time and to work together to resolve them in a satisfactory fashion.